What is up, Trailblazers? Today we are doing a video guide on Sampo. Whether you love him or you hate him, he is due for his first rate up banner experience alongside Kafka and her ability to boost the damage of DoT characters. So as such, we're going to be covering Sampo. We'll be running through his kit, including Eidolon and Trace Value. We'll be doing build options, including light cones and relics. And we'll also be talking a bit about team comps, although somewhat premature given we are about to get Kafka in 6 days and we all know who he's going to want to team up with. As always, if you would like to support the channel, please feel free to leave a like or a comment or even better, a subscribe. It's very much appreciated. With that said, let's get into it. Very quickly before we do the actual kit guide, I just wanted to very briefly discuss DoT. So DoT, or damage over time, is a mechanic of applying status effects like your wind shears, your burns, your shocks to do damage, and guess what? Over time. You should know that there are two types of DoT, the break DoT and the normal DoT. As you can see here, where I weakness broke the Void Ranger, that he has two types of wind shear applied to him. This will be both the break and the normal DoT application, because I used Sampo's skill to both break him and apply wind shear, which was my normal DoT. However, in the case of the Trotter, you can see that there's only one type of wind shear because there was no wind weakness, and so using Sampo's skill did not deplete the enemy's toughness, and so there was no break DoT applied. The break DoT is exactly what you think it is. You break an enemy's toughness and it applies the break effect. This type of DoT actually scales on the character's level and break effect, and it's why you sometimes see an Asta doing a ton of damage on her breaks. The normal DoT is applied by a skill that applies the debuff specifically, and the normal DoT will not crit. So in Sampo's case, when he applies wind shear based on his attack percent stat through his basic attack or his skill or his ultimate, whenever the wind shear is coming from, with a normal DoT, this hit can scale with element damage percentage like a wind sphere, and it will scale off the stat mentioned in the application. So in Sampo's case, it's attack percentage, and then of course it will scale with any other bonuses such as a light cone. Enough said. Now remember that for when we talk about builds later. In terms of multipliers, if you want to understand a bit more about DoT, I will leave a link to two resources that go through the complicated numerical labyrinth of how DoT scales. In very simple terms, when generically looking at characters who deal DoT damage, you'll be using a character who does not deal all of their damage in one big hit like a typical screenshot nuke, and you'll be instead dealing a series of damage over time that won't crit, in some cases can stack, and will need to bypass the enemy's effect resistance to land the DoT. Now that was really important to understand, because when we look at Sampo's kit, you will see that a lot of the focus is on wind shear, which is a type of DoT, and in Sampo's case today we'll be primarily talking about the normal DoT. So starting with his skill, Ricochet Love, at level 10 it deals 56% of Sampo's attack to a single enemy. After the initial attack, his skill will bounce 4 extra times, dealing another 4 sets of 56% wind damage based on his attack to enemies. Given it's a bounce, it is random. Sampo's ultimate, Surprise Present, at level 10 is a 120 energy cost that deals wind damage equal to 160% of Sampo's attack to all enemies, with a 100% base chance to increase the damage on a target's DoT by 30% for 2 turns. Also, it doesn't say this, but it does hit 4 times. I don't know why it doesn't say that though. It's also worth noting that the 30% DoT damage increase can be utilized by other DoT applicators such as Hook, for example, and so his ultimate has some utility in there for DoT teams. His talent, Wind Torn Dagger, it will imbue Sampo's attack with a 65% chance to inflict wind shear for 3 turns. Enemies inflicted with the wind shear will take wind DoT equal to 52% of Sampo's attack, with the wind shear stacking up to 5 times. The stacking element to his talent is where Sampo gets a lot of his damage from, because it can, be equivalent to 5 stacks, 260% of damage. It's not very hard for Sampo to reach that, and so a very good way to get damage out. Now finally, Sampo's technique, Shining Bright, he throws a flash bomb, it makes him invisible, and that will inflict blind for 10 seconds, and if you attack a blinded enemy, you will delay all enemies' actions by 25%, so a very situational but powerful technique. I will follow up with a full kit summary in a minute to unpack everything that's going on with Sampo, but he is one of those characters that meshes well with his Eidolons, so I want to talk about Traces and Eidolons first, and then we'll jump back. Starting with his Traces, which I actually do think are a bit underwhelming. Maybe someone correct me in the comments, but his major Traces are just not that impressive to me. His A2 Trap, it extends wind shear from his talent by 1 turn, but every application of wind shear will just reset that turn count anyway, so it doesn't have that much utility. His A4 will refund him an extra 10 energy of his 120 ultimate cost, so not bad, but it's still pretty minimum. And then his A6 will reduce the damage Sampo receives from enemies by 15% if they have the wind shear effect. I've seen people obviously reference that this is some good survivability, which it is, but most of the time you don't want him taking the hits anyway, so again, very situational. Now, his minor traces, there's a lot of attack percent and EHR in there, so grab all of it as much as you can because he will, and you'll see in the build later, rely on those stats pretty heavily. For Eidolons, I will note that he doesn't need his Eidolons and he's pretty good at base, but let's just unpack them given that he's a 4-star, he's been in the shop, and if you're playing on Kafka, you might be lucky enough to get a few copies of him. His E1, Rising Love, will actually add another bounce to his skill. It's great for multiple things. It gives additional toughness break-in, it will help stack his talent quicker, and additionally, it's very good for getting an extra bit of energy refund on the skill cast, helping him reach his 120 ult cost quicker. E2, Infectious Enthusiasm. When an enemy with wind shear is defeated, there is a 100% base chance to inflict a stack of wind shear to all other enemies. His E3 and E5 are his standard increases to skill, basic attack, talent, and ultimate. And then his E4, the deeper the love, the stronger the hate. When his skill hits an enemy with 5 or more stacks of wind shear, the enemy immediately takes 8% of current wind shear damage. Now this does sound pretty niche, but he's pretty good at stacking wind shear, and this can become a very good Eidolon for pre-proccing some extra damage against slower enemies who haven't actually procced their turn as often as you would like. Given that his basic attack can apply percentage of wind shear damage on those enemies, it's a great sneaky way to get in a bit of extra damage. And then finally his E6, the wind shear multiplier damage increases by 15%. This is a very great Eidolon because it's an extra damage increase and it makes sense as to why it's very far up. Don't underestimate the 15% on top of all the damage that he's already got. So let's summarize his base kit quickly. Believe it or not, Sampo is a very skill point efficient character because of his talent's insistence on applying wind shear to the enemy. His talent is very easy to stack because he takes into account the multiple hits on his basic attack, his skill, and his ultimate as individual hits. He becomes very self-sufficient on skill points then because every application of a wind shear through either his basic or ultimate will actually restart the number of turns the enemy is affected by wind shear, meaning that once he's already applied initial wind shear through something like his skill, he can just basic attack in most situations. He's also a very strong breaker character because of the bouncing element of his skill, which works exactly how Asta's and Wells does. You can guarantee that the first hit will land on the enemy you choose, but given that it bounces around on the second hit onwards, it can become a bit more calculated with the fewer enemies you're using it on, thereby helping you to break down the toughness of an enemy quicker. His minor traces are very great, and the attack and EHR are exactly what he needs to perform well. Finally, it's definitely worth not overlooking the DoT debuff in his ultimate because at the moment, he is the only one that can do that, and he'll be a very great synergistic user with the rest of the character on Kafka's banner that he shares a spot with. With his kit covered, let's quickly move on to light cones and relic options, but luckily Sampo is very easy to build in my opinion. Starting with light cones, he can actually take advantage of a lot of the nihility options we have, but you want to be careful and just ensure that you know he doesn't benefit from crit stats overall, and so you need to avoid falling in the trap of trying to build a DPS character with crit. Additionally, there is a benchmark goal of getting his effect hit rate to 67% for applying wind shear, so trying to reach that wherever possible is advised. Starting off with some free-to-play options for light cones, Fermata can be a great light cone on Sampo. The break effect will put in work for his ability to get off a ton of toughness breaks with his skill, and it's pretty obvious that I'm referring to this light cone because of its synergy with the wind shear damage percent. Another decent free-to-play option is before the tutorial mission starts. It's got effect hit rate percentage that we want at base, but you need to be careful about making sure that you have a defense reducer on the team, and so I'd put it down as lower value than just picking up a copy of Fermata. Where you get a lot of value out of this light cone is if you had a Kafka or a Luka on the team wearing something like Resolution Shines as Pearls of Sweat, and then the two light cones could synergize with each other. Moving up the road, I do like his signature light cone a lot. It really emphasizes his best traits, and you get at base a nice 20% effect hit rate, and you can increase the damage of his DoT by 24%, so a very simple but not to be underestimated light cone. I do think Good Night and Sleep Well is a great light cone, but it falls slightly behind of his signature for 4-star options because you have to run him with someone else to apply debuffs to make sure that he can get the most out of the passives stacking effect. For 5 stars, if you do have a copy of Welt's signature in the name of the world, then you can of course run this. He will get a lot of value out of the damage buff and the attack buff. The effect hit rate on his skill is situational value because his skill hits so many times that on fewer targets, the emphasis on effect hit rate for the skill is not as in demand as you might think it needs to be, but overall it's a 5-star weapon, so some great stats on there. And then for the other 5 stars, Incessant Rain and Patience is all you need. It's probably going to be better to put these on your Silver Wolf or Kafka respectively, and I'm guessing that you pulled these with the intent to do that, but obviously the stats are very good, and of course you can throw it on him and it's not going to hurt. See, a lot of light cones. Luckily his relic options are just as flexible too. For Relics, Sampo is one of the few characters that can actually get more utility out of a 2-piece combination than a full 4-piece. And given that he doesn't need to crit to perform well, you can just throw some of your off pieces on him that emphasize more attack percentage, effect hit rate, and speed. Right now, any combination of Eagle of Twilight Lane, Musketeer of Wild Wheat, and Messenger of Traversing Hackerspace are going to be great options on Sampo. The draw from all 3 of these sets is to improve his overall damage, attack percentage, and speed. Attack will empower the damage he does with his DoT, and the speed pickup is going to let you flexibly get off a lot more basic attacks in between enemy turns, which will let you recover skill points, and if you have his E4, help trigger a ton of extra damage. For playing out ornaments, there's 2 sets that I could easily recommend. The first one being Pan-Galactic Commercial Enterprise, which has a lot of value if you're not getting high enough effect hit rate from your relics. With a 10% to effect hit rate, you can flexibly meet the build benchmarks easier for the 67%, and then the 2-piece effect, if you're at 67%, will give an attack percent increase of just under 17%. Naturally, if you are scoring above 67% effect hit rate, then the attack buff will be higher, but you will need a total of 100% effect hit rate, which is a bit overkill if you want the maximum 25% attack buff. In that instance, there is some value in just using any space sealing stations that you have lying around because you're already at this minimum 67% effect hit rate, and it's a very easy double 24% attack buff to him, helping you just to get the most out of his damage. When thinking about stats on your relics, you are going to want to focus on hitting that benchmark of 67% effect hit rate and then look to maximize your attack and speed equally as much as possible. I would recommend main stats for body piece of effect hit rate or attack percentage. On feet, looking at speed and then attack percentage. In sphere, I would go with a wind damage sphere, and then finally for his link rope, I would say attack percentage, or I've seen some good recommendations for energy regeneration, which is a good shout given his 120 high ultimate cost. Finally, it wouldn't be a guide video if I didn't talk briefly to teams, but it's very worthwhile noticing that I'm releasing this now because he's going to be on the Kafka banner, and while we can't confirm or deny what her kit will be, her shtick is that she will improve the overall damage of DoT teams, and so a lot of people that summon Sampo are going to come to Sampo guide videos looking for some team options. As such, we are very likely going to see that the Kafka DoT team comp will be Sampo's best place, especially given that his ultimate will increase overall DoT damage by lowering the enemy's resistance to DoT by up to 30%. In the meantime, there are some more obvious team synergies that you can pick up, such as a really simple free-to-play Sampo comp with him acting as the main damage dealer, and you can see in this example, again, his ultimate would then help something like Serval's Shock. Now, I've also recommended a team with Huck, Asta, and March 7th. It's not exactly a unique or new team. It follows the same principle of the free-to-play team. The idea is that you'll be leveraging the ultimate to boost the power of other DoT applying characters. So in this case, he will be helping Huck's burns, for example, and then you've got people like Asta getting off breaks to apply the burns more quicker, and then you've got March 7th or a healer to apply some type of, staying alive. With that said though, it's going to be, like I say, really obvious that in this time next week, his best place will most likely be on a double DoT team, so Kafka and Sampo, or potentially, depending on how well you can get a strong preservation character such as a Loacha or a Gepard, you might even go as far as to see triple DoT teams propping up with the addition of Luka or Serval. And that, my friends, is everything that I have for Sampo in today's version 1.2. Like I said at the start of the video, if you did enjoy the content, then please do feel free to leave a like or a comment below and let me know if you're pulling for him or Kafka. And if you are, then good luck and thanks for checking in. Bye.